Before Madonna became the queen of pop, she was a 19-year-old girl eating from trash cans in Times Square. On November 12, 1978, she walked into a dance audition after being robbed, assaulted, and humiliated. She had no shoes, no money, and nothing left to lose. What she did in that audition room became the moment that changed everything, but not in the way you'd think. It was a freezing November morning in Manhattan, and Madonna Ciccone had been in New York City for exactly 47 days. She'd arrived with $35, a winter coat, and a dream that everyone back in Michigan told her was impossible. Now she had none of those things. The day started at 4 a.m. when Madonna woke up on the floor of a condemned building in the Bronx. She'd been squatting there with 3 other dancers for 2 weeks, ever since she'd been evicted from her previous place for missing rent. There was no heat, no running water, and the only food in the building was whatever they could find or afford. For Madonna, that meant the day-old donuts that Dunkin' Donuts threw away in the dumpster behind their store on 42nd Street. But today was different. Today was the audition that could change everything. The Pearl Lang Dance Company was holding open auditions, and Pearl Lang herself, a legend in modern dance, would be there. Getting into her company meant a steady paycheck, professional training, and most importantly, legitimacy as a dancer in New York City. Madonna had been preparing for this moment since she'd arrived in the city. She'd been taking classes whenever she could sneak in, practicing in subway stations when it was too cold outside, and studying every dancer she could watch through studio windows. At 6 a.m., Madonna left the building and started walking toward the subway station. She was wearing everything she owned: a thin jacket, a torn leotard under her jeans, and a pair of dance shoes that were falling apart. She had no money for the subway, so she'd planned to jump the turnstile like she'd done dozens of times before. But this morning, someone was watching. "Hey you," a man's voice called out as she approached the station entrance. Madonna kept walking, but she felt him following her. She walked faster, so did he. What happened next lasted less than 3 minutes, but it would stay with her forever. The man grabbed her from behind, shoved her against a wall in the stairwell, and demanded her bag. She tried to fight back, but he was stronger. He took her bag, which contained her dance shoes, her only pair of clean tights, and a granola bar she'd been saving for after the audition. Then he shoved her down the stairs and ran. Madonna sat there on the cold concrete, her knee bleeding, her jacket torn, and her dance shoes gone. She had 2 hours until the audition started. Most people would have gone home, but Madonna didn't have a home to go to. She stood up, wiped the blood from her knee with her torn jacket, and made a choice that would define her entire career. She was going to that audition no matter what. Madonna limped out of the subway station and started walking. The dance studio was on the Upper West Side, over 50 blocks away, in the freezing November cold. With no coat and bleeding through her jeans, she walked. Every step hurt. Her knee was swelling. She was hungry, cold, and humiliated. But she kept walking. At 7:30 a.m., she passed a Dunkin' Donuts. The morning shift was just starting, and they were throwing out yesterday's trash. Madonna waited until the employee went back inside. Then she walked to the dumpster and found half a chocolate donut. She ate it standing there in the alley, crying, but she didn't stop walking. At 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the audition started, Madonna arrived at the Pearl Lang Dance Company studio on West 61st Street. She looked at her reflection in the studio window. Her jacket was torn, her jeans were dirty and stained with blood. Her hair was a mess. She had no shoes. For a moment she considered leaving, These were professional dancers inside, people who had money, training, and proper dance clothes. She looked like she'd been living on the street, because she had been. Madonna took a deep breath, opened the door, and walked inside. The studio was full of dancers, at least 40 of them, all stretching, warming up, and chatting nervously. They were wearing expensive dancewear, perfectly styled hair, and the kind of confidence that comes from knowing you belong. She was barefoot, dirty, and obviously injured. She smelled like garbage and subway stations. Her clothes were torn and stained. One dancer actually stepped away from her. Another whispered something to her friend, and they both laughed. But Madonna walked to an empty spot near the back of the studio, sat down, and began stretching like nothing was wrong. A teaching assistant approached her. "Excuse me, do you have an appointment?" "This is an open audition," Madonna said without looking up. "I'm here to dance." The assistant looked uncomfortable. "Do you have dance shoes?" "No. You can't audition without shoes." Madonna finally looked up, and there was something in her eyes that made the assistant take a step back. "Watch me." At 9 a.m. exactly, 3 people walked into the studio. Pearl Lang herself, along with 2 other instructors from the company. Pearl Lang was a living legend. She'd danced with Martha Graham, one of the pioneers of modern dance. She'd performed on stages around the world. She'd seen thousands of dancers in her lifetime, but she'd never seen anything like what she was about to witness. The judges sat down at a table in the front of the studio. Pearl Lang looked around the room, her eyes scanning the dancers. When her gaze landed on Madonna in the back, barefoot, dirty, and bleeding, she paused. "Everyone, please form 3 lines." One of the instructors announced, "We'll be learning a combination, and then you'll perform it in groups of 5. The dancers scrambled to get into position. Madonna stood up and limped to the back line. For the next 20 minutes, the instructor taught a complex modern dance combination. It involved floor work, leaps, turns, and the kind of technical precision that usually took years to master. Madonna watched intently, memorizing every movement. She couldn't practice it fully because of her injured knee, but her mind was recording every detail. The other dancers were struggling to keep up. This was a difficult combination, designed to separate the serious dancers from the amateurs. "All right," the instructor said after the final run-through. "First group, you're up." The first 5 dancers performed the combination. They were good, technically proficient, clean lines, proper form. Pearl Lang watched without expression, occasionally making notes. The second group went, then the third, then the fourth. Each group was professional, polished, and prepared. Everything that Madonna wasn't. "Next group," the instructor called out. Madonna limped forward to join the 5th group. The music started, a piece of classical music with dramatic rises and falls. The 5 dancers began moving. Within the first 8 counts, one thing became immediately clear. Madonna couldn't execute the combination cleanly. Her injured knee wouldn't allow it. She couldn't do the turns. She couldn't do the leaps. But something else happened, something nobody expected. Madonna began interpreting the movement instead of copying it. Where the combination called for a leap she couldn't do, she did a different movement that captured the same emotional intention. Where the choreography required turns on her injured leg, she substituted floor work that was even more dramatic. She wasn't dancing the combination they'd taught. She was creating something entirely new in real time, using the original choreography as a blueprint. And she was doing it barefoot, bleeding, and half-starving. The other 4 dancers in her group gradually stopped dancing. They were watching Madonna, mesmerized by what she was doing. The entire room went silent, except for the music. Pearl Lang stood up from her chair. Madonna was lost in the movement now. She'd forgotten about the judges, the other dancers, the pain in her knee. She was dancing with a desperation and honesty that you can't fake. She was dancing like her life depended on it, because it did. When the music ended, Madonna collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily. Her knee was bleeding again. She was covered in sweat. She looked up at the judges, expecting to be dismissed. Pearl Lang was staring at her with an expression nobody could read. The room stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. Then Pearl Lang spoke. "What's your name?" "Madonna Ciccone." "Madonna," Pearl Lang said slowly, as if testing the weight of the name. "That was the most technically incorrect performance I've seen in 20 years of teaching." Madonna felt her heart sink. She'd failed. It was also, Pearl Lang continued, the most honest, raw, and emotionally truthful dancing I've seen in just as long. You didn't dance the combination I taught, but you understood something more important. You understood the purpose behind the movement. She paused, looking at Madonna's torn clothes and bleeding knee. "What happened to you today?" Madonna could have lied. She could have made up a story that sounded less desperate, less humiliating. Instead, she told the truth. "I was robbed this morning," Madonna said quietly. "He took my dance shoes and everything else I had. I walked 50 blocks to get here because I didn't have subway fare. I know I look terrible, and I know I can't dance like everyone else in this room. But I can work harder than anyone here, and I will never ever stop trying." Pearl Lang looked at the other two judges. They whispered to each other for a moment. Then Pearl Lang addressed the entire room. "Everyone, thank you for coming. We'll be in touch with those who are selected for callbacks." She turned back to Madonna. "Except you. You stay." The other dancers filed out, many of them looking back at Madonna with expressions ranging from confusion to jealousy. When the room was empty, except for Madonna and the three judges, Pearl Lang walked over to her. "I'm not going to offer you a position in my company," she said. Madonna felt the rejection like a physical blow. "Not because you're not talented," Pearl Lang continued, "but because you're not meant to be in my company or anyone else's company. You're not meant to follow choreography or dance in someone else's shadow." She knelt down so she was at eye level with Madonna. "You're meant to be the one creating the vision, not executing it. You have something that can't be taught. You have a perspective, an intensity, and a fearlessness that only comes from fighting for survival." Pearl Lang stood back up. "If you stay in dance, you might have a successful career. But I think you're meant for something bigger, something that hasn't been done before." She handed Madonna a $20 bill. "Get some food, get your knee looked at, and whatever you decide to do with your life, don't let anyone convince you to be ordinary. The world has enough technically perfect dancers. It needs people who aren't afraid to break the rules." Madonna left that studio with $20, a bandaged knee, and something more valuable than either of those things: validation. Not the validation of being accepted into a dance company, but the validation that her instinct to trust herself, to interpret rather than imitate, to feel rather than perform, was the right instinct. She never auditioned for another dance company. Instead, she took Pearl Lang's words to heart. Within a year, she'd formed her own band. Within 2 years, she was performing in New York clubs with a sound and style that nobody had heard before. Within 5 years, she'd have her first #1 hit. But it all started in that moment, barefoot, bleeding and broken, when she chose to dance her truth instead of someone else's choreography. Years later, after Madonna had become one of the most successful artists in music history, a journalist asked Pearl Lang about that audition. "Did you know she'd become Madonna?" the journalist asked. Pearl Lang smiled. "I knew she'd become someone who changed things. People like that, people who've lost everything and still show up. They're not interested in fitting in, they're interested in revolution." She paused, remembering that November morning. Madonna walked into my studio looking like she'd been to hell and back, and instead of apologizing for it, she turned it into art. That's not something you can teach. That's something you're born with, and life either crushes it out of you or makes it stronger. "Which one happened to Madonna?" the journalist asked. "Look around," Pearl Lang said. "The girl who ate from garbage cans became the queen of pop. What do you think?" The story of Madonna's first New York audition reminds us that sometimes our greatest moments don't come from succeeding in the traditional sense. They come from being so authentic, so undeniably ourselves, that we give others permission to do the same. Madonna could have spent years trying to become the perfect technical dancer. She could have followed the rules, learned the proper technique, and maybe gotten into a dance company. Instead, she showed up as herself, broken, desperate, but completely honest. And that honesty changed everything. She didn't get accepted that day, but she got something better. She got redirected toward her true purpose. Today there's a photo in the Pearl Lang Dance Theatre archives. It's a blurry image of that November 1978 audition. In the back, you can barely make out a girl with dark hair dancing barefoot. Below the photo, there's a caption: "The day we met Madonna, not the day we rejected Madonna, or the day Madonna auditioned. Just the day we met Madonna, because that's exactly what happened. The world met the real Madonna that day, not the polished, perfect performer she could have become, but the fearless, rule-breaking artist she was meant to be. And that girl dancing barefoot in a room full of people who thought she didn't belong changed music forever." If this story of survival, courage, and staying true to yourself moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their struggles might be preparing them for their purpose. Have you ever had a moment where failure redirected you towards something better? Let us know in the comments and ring that notification bell for more incredible true stories about the legends of music.